question I'm sure we'd all like to know the answer to. What is the key to living a happy life? And it's been the focus of a Harvard study of adult development for more than 80 years now. It first began in 1938 and has since included 3 generations and more than 1,300 descendants of the original participants. And now, the current leaders of the study believe they've found the common denominator behind happiness. Joining me is Dr. Robert Waldinger. He's the studies director and a clinical professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Marc Schulz. He is the associate director as well as a professor of psychology at Bryn Mawr College. They are also the co-authors of the new book, The Good Life, Lessons from the World's Longest Scientific Study of Happiness. So, you weren't there at the beginning.
No, no. I'm not that well preserved.
Who can tell me how the study was set up? Who's best to do that?
Probably me.
All right, so talk to me about who these people were, how you got them, and what, for us to understand what the methodology of the study was.
These studies started in 1938. One started at Harvard College, a group of sophomores, 19 years old. It was a study of how young men moved into young adulthood, and the other was a study of inner city Boston boys from some of the most troubled and disadvantaged families. And that was a study of how some kids who were born with so much disadvantage were able to stay on good developmental paths and stay out of trouble.
One of the things, Mark, in reading about the study and looking at some of the articles about it that I found fascinating was the compliance, as I think you say in your business, on how many people decided to stay filling out the survey, when they decided not to answer the questions, some of the things that they added on the side. How would you rate this compliance success, and what did you learn by the parts that people didn't comply with?
Yeah, it's remarkable because the study has taken place over 85 years, and across that time, 84% of the participants have continued to participate, which is a remarkable compliance rate, as we say. So we're really pleased. Folks have been very committed to this study. But that doesn't mean that they answer every question. So this is a study that was really interested in the lived firsthand experience of participants. So we had regular interviews, but we also had lots of traditional questionnaires, and many of our participants would write comments on the side saying, you need to ask this in a different way, or here's the question you should be asking. And sometimes they would skip questions. And the skipping of questions is interesting in a study where we're able to track them because we could always go back and to ask them during the interview. Many of the questions folks skipped often were challenging questions about their greatest fears or a challenge that they had in their lives. So there were probably reasons why people skipped them over the years.
And Bob, one of the things that, I think we should say up front, this was 1938, so it wasn't as if they were seeking out a diverse group of people, women, minority members also. I mean, it was diverse, I think, that they were looking for young men who were having a tough time economically. That was the diversity then.
Well, and also a lot of immigrant families, families from the Middle East as well as Eastern and Western Europe. And then we expanded, and then we brought in women in both generations.
And you're able to extrapolate from the original data and the additional folks that joined, feel confident that what you've come out with is directionally good advice.
Well, and the way we do that is by making sure that our study alone isn't what we rely on, that we bring in lots of other studies. And if other studies point to the same findings, then we can have confidence in what we've found.
All right, so we've done a big build-up here. We've talked about how you've done it, who participated in it, and Mark, for the million-dollar answer, how can I be happier?
So the answer is really simple. When we look in our study and across these hundreds of other studies, what we find are relationships keep us happier and healthier throughout our lifespan. It's as simple a message as that. And it's all kinds of relationships, not just the person who you may spend the most time with, but it's your friends, it's relatives, it's people you work with, people in your neighborhood. It's all kinds of relationships are important.
And being happy isn't just about, feeling good about myself. There are some real strong connections between my health and my happiness.
Absolutely. It works both ways, that being happy And having good relationships keeps us healthier, but also being healthier means we have the energy to reach out and stay connected to people. So it's really a two-way street.
Mark, one of the things, I'm 61 now, and now I've seen a few kids grow up, right? And from birth to adulthood, some of them even longer. And I often say to some people, I feel like at 6 months, I kind of know who they're going to be. Right? I don't know which way they're going to go, but I kind of like, oh, you're acting the same way now at 35 that you did when I met you when you were 6 months old. And in this study, you sort of, you accommodate for that, myself, for example, I'm either an introverted extrovert or an extroverted introvert. I don't know which, but I'm not always happy when I'm with people, but I feel happy when I know I'm connected to people. And so if you're watching at home and you think, like Sally Field recently said on the press tour for their movie, I don't really like people, but it doesn't mean she's not connected to people, right?
Well, I think we do come in different flavors, as you're suggesting, and some of us thrive when we're with lots of people, and some of us need it to be a little quieter, and maybe it's smaller numbers of connections that are important to us, but we all need connections. So the trick is figuring out the places where you thrive the best. It may not be at a big party if you're on the more introverted side, but across the spectrum, introversion to extroversion, lots of other flavors we come in, people thrive when they have those connections with others. That's the critical piece. The way in which we do it may differ depending on who we are.
And one of the things we found, and we think is true for everybody, is whether you're shy or a party animal, that all of us need one relationship at least where we feel like the person would really be there whenever we needed them. At one point, we asked our original participants, who could you call in the middle of the night if you were sick or scared? List everybody. And most of them could list people, but some people couldn't list anybody. So we believe that no matter who you are, you need at least one or two of those kinds of relationships in your life.
My question is, will you meet me at the corner with a bag of $2,000 in unmarked bills and not ask any questions?
Oh, okay. All
Just
right.
a little different take on that. But as you said, we come in all flavors. Mark, talk to me, too, about this epidemic of loneliness that we're having. And I'm going to ask you, Doctor, to weigh in as this as well. I mean, we're at a moment right now where almost anybody I ever met in my life, I can connect with, right? I can search them. I can find my kindergartner friend that I remember her name, but I don't know where she went. I could reach out to her. I can email her. I can text her. I can send her a TikTok of my family dancing. Yet with all of this connectivity, we're seeing these numbers of loneliness climb up. What's the disconnect between this connectivity and loneliness?
It's such an important question. So, I would say there are forces at work that have been building for decades here that have made us more geographically isolated from each other. We're a very mobile society, so many of us have moved, oftentimes for jobs or relationships, away from where we grew up. So we're distant from our families and maybe from our school friends that we grew up with. And then we have these technologies that you've talked about that have great promise and can connect us in really important ways. But I think it's a balancing act for us as individuals and for society. The balance is between the sort of quick jolt that we get from a lovely text from a friend that says, I'm thinking about you, or something reminded me of you. And the difference between that and a kind of sustained connection that we might have, often through technology, it could be through Zoom, but it's different than the connections that we have in real time, whether it's virtually mediated through Zoom or interactions in the same room. So I think we're thirsting for those kinds of connections, and we're distracted. These technologies often distract us from the presence of other people, so our attention is distracted even when we're with people. So I think it's a challenge in modern life, and the numbers of people that feel lonely are quite extraordinary. It's 20 to 40% of adults in the US report being lonely. So this is a major challenge, and it has significant consequences for our health. So it's a public health challenge of note.
And we certainly saw that impact during the COVID stay-at-home orders, where folks who had thriving social lives or a connected person were denied that, and it had dire consequences.
Yes, but as Mark says, it was on the rise before COVID, this loneliness and disconnection. And the difficulty is that the culture seems to prioritize other things, individualism, intense focus on work, And so what we see is a decline for decades, actually, in how much we invest in other people and in our communities. And so the question is, are there ways that we could structure our lives and our communities to reverse that trend?
To lead to that, not only in a public health area, but in an individual way, you know, in the Atlantic article that features the study, you talk about an individual, a man who's, you know, you changed his name to protect his identity. This survey required some self-reflection. And some of the questions asked of people, this man lived a very isolated life, even though he began the study with family and a sister and a wife. And the questions, when asked of him, he seemed surprised when you asked him, well, how's your sister? How's your wife? Do we need to do more self-reflection to really audit ourselves to see how we can become more happier?
Well, that's what we talk about in the book, actually, that each of us can reflect. What am I getting from my relationships? You know, different things, fun and material help and confidence and all that. And then what would I like more of? And is there a way to get more of that from the relationships I have or to develop new relationships?
Professor, talk to me if there's 5 things that someone watching can do to try and take steps to increase their happiness. I mean, we're living in, as everyone always is, we're living in times that it's difficult to be happy sometimes just looking at the news. But your personal happiness is almost a separate, to me at least, is a separate thing from the environmental happiness. What can some people do just to try and take some steps forward?
Yeah, there are some important things I think we can all do. So part of it is really leaning into our connections, thinking about those folks, as Bob suggested, that are important in our life, that are meaningful. Let them know that that's important, and also make it your intention to spend more time with them. So I've been trying to make it a habit recently of not just saying, let's get together soon, but let's set a date that's in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever our time can allow. So really identifying those people, letting them know they're important, setting those dates are really important. Doing activities are another really important source, particularly for people who are looking to develop new relationships, that we develop friendships by repeated contact with people, and doing things side by side generates a connection that can build into a friendship. Really important, particularly for folks that are in transitions in a new community, retiring, to make those kinds of new friends. So those are a bunch of things that people can do, but it's really being intentional. We talk about it as social fitness, and we want folks to think about this just like they do going to the gym, to be really intentional and to work on strengthening those social muscles.
A little harder for men than it is for women.
It is, but men are prioritizing relationships more and more, and what we find is that they just relate to each other somewhat differently than women. But the research says relationships are really important to men too. And if I could just add to what Marc is saying, that, you know, these efforts that Marc's talking about, to be intentional, they could be tiny. So people could be listening to us right now and think, who do I miss? Who would I like to connect with? And then just send them a text or send them a message saying, I was just thinking of you and wanted to say hi, and just see what you get back. And if we do that regularly, lots of things come our way.
The book, again, is The Good Life: Lessons from the World's Longest Scientific Study of Happiness. Dr. Robert Waldinger and Marc Schulz, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.